So for Luke chapter 2, Mike Willis has it broken down into four major topics. First will be the birth of Jesus, then the visit of the shepherds to Jesus right after he's born. It'll skip some time and tell us about the event of whenever Jesus and his family are in Jerusalem for a Passover when he's about age of 12. And then it'll finish with, do the circumcision and the presentation of Jesus right after his birth, and then when he's in Jerusalem for the Passover. I kept this slide from Jeremiah's lesson. So it was, he talked about from the comparison between John and Jesus. We will cover the last few of those, of them being born, the circumcision name, the prophetic response, and then the very end, Jesus growing in stature and everything among God and men. So, starting out, verse 1 through 7 deals with the birth of Jesus. So, everybody is familiar with this story. What is the kind of the circumstances that starts out this first part of Luke chapter 2? What does Luke start out by telling us?
Talks about the taxation process that's going on where they have to go to their home cities.
Exactly. So a census was to be made. They were to go to their hometown. It's where they can be numbered, and the ultimate reason was for taxation. That's right. So they had to, what does this mean for Joseph and Mary? They had to travel from their town where they were living in Nazareth down to Bethlehem, which was both of their hometown. I'll see if our doesn't really show up on the screen too well. So Nazareth is right up above Galilee, and then Bethlehem is down below Jerusalem. Does anybody have an idea about how many miles that is? I think Mike tells us in the paper.
100 plus.
About 100 miles, yep. Any guess about how long it would take them to get down from Nazareth, or it says up because of elevation, but from Nazareth to Bethlehem?
5 or 6 days probably.
Yeah, 5 or 6 days is pretty good on average. If they traveled about 20 miles a day, which is seems like a lot to me, it would be about 5 or so days. But how pregnant is Mary? I mean, she's very pregnant, right? She's about ready to have this baby. So it's, that's one thing that may have taken them longer to get down there. The other thing that I read is, hostilities along the way, not wanting to travel along main roads. So there are a bunch of other factors in there that could have extended their time, which we'll talk about maybe come into play whenever they actually get there into Bethlehem. Well, yeah, we don't have these nice paved roads and carts and wagons, all that stuff. I mean, she was probably on a donkey and traveling, and it was probably not an easy, fun, or quick trip for sure. So it's a little bit bummer. I wish I would have been able to show that better on the map. But so they travel from Nazareth to Bethlehem. They get there.
Well, I think all that combined shows you they wouldn't have done this just to do it. The prophecy is that the Messiah is born in Bethlehem. This is bringing him there, and the circumstances line up. God's going to prove His word true. This is going to be a fulfilled prophecy. And I think that's just kind of the nuance of this. That they were never in their right mind to get up and go to Nazareth when she's 9 months pregnant, but they did because they had to.
For sure, and we'll talk more about that prophetic, fulfilling prophecies in a little bit. But the other thing too is I'm not sure how often they had to go down there for this census and taxation. It doesn't tell us, and I didn't dig into the weeds for that.
They had a Roman census prior to this, and this one was for more the whole empire the Romans covered. So it would be, that's why he mentions the Quirinius, or however you say that, governing Syria. So there's a more widespread census, I think.
Yeah. So, but the point is like Jeremiah's saying, they had to go down there because God used that to fulfill the prophecy of going down there for this census. Jason?
Also kind of indicates the harshness of the political environment that, they had to do that, even in her condition. It wasn't a situation where they said, yeah, just whenever you get a chance, go take care of this. So they're under this pretty harsh rule.
And that they both had to. Joseph couldn't just go down there and take care of it for both of them. But yes, exactly. Like, did not matter to the Romans. They were told to do this. They had to go do it regardless of the situation. So they get down there, no room in the inn. One thing that, whenever, as a kid growing up, and even now, like, in my mind, I think like a hotel, right? Like, there's a bunch of rooms. Go to a building, there's a bunch of rooms, and you can rent a room and stay there. And, well, that certainly might have been the case, that they went to a place where there were a bunch of rooms, but there wasn't any room there. If somebody will turn over to Mark chapter 14, this word that is translated as inn, the Greek word is katalima or something, but that we'll see in Mark 14, and then also it's the same, Luke, same account, but from Luke, where you have Jesus. He's just about getting ready to be betrayed, and he's going to try to find a place to partake of the Passover one last time. He's going to institute the Lord's Supper, that sort of stuff. But he tells some of his disciples to go and try to find a place. Does somebody want to read Mark 14 and start in verse 13? So Mark 14, 13 through 15.
And he
please.
sent out of two of his disciples and said to them, Go into the city, and a man will meet you carrying a pitcher of water. Follow him. Wherever he goes in, say to the master of the house, The teacher says, Where's the guest room in which I may eat the Passover with my disciples? And he will show you a large upper room furnished and prepared. There make ready for us.
So again, Luke's is the same, that same instance, but his account. But there we read that they sent him to go find a guest room, a place to take it. So, while it certainly could have been an inn that they go and there was no room, it also could have been that wherever they were going to stay, it was somebody's house, and there just wasn't room there. Now, I don't know how big Bethlehem is to know if there was an inn or multiple inns, or if there were multiple houses that they could have stayed in. But the point is, it doesn't matter. There is no place for them to stay. So, what do they have to do instead? Wherever they were going to stay, they couldn't. So, where do they have to stay the nights?
In the manger, where they feed the animals.
In a stable, where there's, where there's the houses, or where they are keeping the animals. That's right. So, the birth of Jesus. Well, he's there in the stable, birth of Jesus, swaddled and laid in a manger. Mike Willis points out, and it's obvious to us, that is not what you would expect the Messiah, the circumstances, the conditions for him to be born in. Very, very humble. I mean, I don't know that it gets much more, not prestigious than that. It just kind of, really kind of sets the precedence as far as it wasn't about Jesus being elevated from a physical or a popularity, any of that circumstances. That wasn't the point right from the very beginning. The purpose was Jesus to come to fulfill, like we'll read, go through a little bit later, but to fulfill the old law, to bring the gospel salvation, and to establish his kingdom. Jeremiah had mentioned that him being born in Bethlehem was one of the three prophecies that was fulfilled right then. That prophecy was from Isaiah chapter 7 and verse 14. That he was born of a virgin was Isaiah 7:14. The second, that he was born in Bethlehem, was Micah 5:2. And then the third was that he was born a descendant of Abraham and David. Just out of curiosity, anybody right off the top of their head know of what passage would you go to in the New Testament to prove that Jesus' lineage was from Abraham and David? What? Yeah, exactly. Matthew chapter 1, verses 1 and 6. That would be a place to go to that would prove going down through Jesus' lineages. Very good. Was it just blind luck, coincidence, chance that Jesus was born in Bethlehem of a virgin, fulfilling these three prophecies? Obviously not. We know that was providence from God. Galatians chapter 4 and verse 4. Somebody want to turn there and read that? Rick, you got it?
But when the fullness of time had come, God sent forth his Son, born of a woman, born under the law.
So the exact, it's mind-boggling when you think about, God in his wisdom from the beginning of time, everything's setting up and playing up to be this exact right time in history. You have the expanse of the Roman Empire, everything's set up that this is the exact right time for this to happen. Can't be anything other than providence. Any questions or comments before we move on from here? James?
Just agree would be like an incredible probability.
I thought about doing that, where the list of the prophecies and texts and the coins, but only reducing it down to these three. I thought about doing that, but it's just the chances of that being, even just one of them happening is astronomical. But to have three of them just like all at the same time. James and then Kurt.
In some of the reading I was reading about this is there are skeptics about the accuracy of Luke and as far as the timing of all this. But as recently as 2009, they found an inscription in Venice saying that this census did take place at this particular time. So it's kind of interesting that every time there's a doubt,
Yeah.
there's something going on. They did have a regular time for their census, and that's what they want to say is, well, this isn't the regular time. Well, they had many censuses beyond the normal. And sometimes it was because to re-regulate things they want to re-regulate. And even some of the smaller provinces would do it on their own in addition to it. So
Yeah.
it's funny how it always gets proved.
Exactly. Yes. Kurt.
Well, there's another thread that we can follow down through here, and that is comparing what the scriptures say, and even though it's a minor point, but what the scriptures teach compared to what man teaches. It is unlikely that the Romans would tell their whole empire to travel to their hometowns at the end of December. It is unlikely that the weather would be acceptable for them to live in a stable if it is freezing outside. It is unlikely that the shepherds would be out tending their flocks on the hillsides in the middle of a snowstorm. There are things like this that we look at. They're minor points, but it just follows a thread of logic that man continually gets things wrong. The birth of Jesus was not in December. And again, over all that, we're never told to celebrate his birth.
Yes. Well, and there's a reason. God in his wisdom, I think there's a reason why we aren't told when it was, because that's not. Yes, it's very important. It's maybe the most historically important thing that happened besides his death and resurrection. But that's kind of the point, is that it's not something that is to be celebrated and elevated, just be acknowledged. And yes, that was a incredible and amazing thing, but go on from there. Jason?
Maybe because man would have the tendency to put more importance on that than it would be distracting in a way that would take away from what God wants us to do, kind of like the brazen serpents.
Yeah.
They were put
Yeah, but that's a good point. I mean, with Moses and the fiery serpent, God sent the serpents to punish them and told Moses to make this serpent to where if they look at it, they will be healed. And it worked, right? But we find out later that became an idol to them. They set it up and started worshiping it, which is one of the reasons why they were carried away into captivity. So, the emphasis wasn't on the serpent. It was on the faith of looking at it that it would heal you. And so, yeah, exactly. Like giving that information, which now I guess people they may have made it up on when it is, but, the point is that it's not the significant thing to look at and focus on, I guess. Very good. Any other?
I think we need to make a distinction too that there's a difference between we can sing songs about His birth and praise God for that and celebrate that in its own unique area, and it's not an official mandate from Scripture where the church does some official thing about it. It's not and it has nothing to do with Christmas, and so you set that aside as well. But it's the song Silent Night. I don't think there's anything wrong with that song, and it's good to praise God that He sent the Word in the flesh and stuff like that. So I think that's important to realize that when we're making that distinction, it's about this religious observance and a standard that God's prescribed versus the Son of God came in the flesh. That's something to praise God about and think about and meditate on and sing praises to Him about even consider that.
That's a good point. I mean, and like we'll move into now the visit of the shepherds. I mean, Jesus' life from birth to death. I mean, we can praise and celebrate and thank God for. We'll see here, and that what's the first thing that the shepherds see? An angel comes to them, and what does the angel tell the shepherds while they're out there with the sheep? The sheep. What does the angel say?
Good tidings. Savior born in the city of David is the Christ the Lord.
Exactly. That peace on earth. The Messiah has been born. Good tidings. What's another very common translation that we have of good tidings? We see it throughout the entire New Testament. Exactly. Gospel. That same word is translated as gospel. It's good news, good tidings. Very good.
We use the word evangelize. It is. We're bringing verb form that we're bringing good news.
It's the active, yes, very good. So the angels tell the shepherds, peace and good tidings, good news, Messiah has been born. This is going to be the sign. This is how you know what I'm saying is true, and this is how you're going to find that Messiah. What does the angel tell the shepherds? What are they to look for? Babe wrapped in swaddling cloths, laid in a manger. Very good. And so they were around Bethlehem. They go into Bethlehem. They find Mary and Joseph and the baby. And what do? What's their response? In verse 17 and then in verse 20.
They left their flocks and went.
Yeah, they left their flocks. They went and they found them. Immediately told them everything that they had seen, everything that they had heard. After the angel told them that initial thing, they had a host of angels singing praises to God. Tell Mary, Joseph, whoever was around, not only them, but then they go in verse 20 that they returned, wherever they were staying along their way. They were telling everybody, and everybody that heard. In verse 18, they marveled at the things that were told to them by the shepherds. They were glorifying and praising God and all the things that they had seen and heard, and everybody that was telling them. So, they weren't keeping quiet about it. They were telling everybody, which is, again, when you think about the gospel and spreading the good news, that's pretty much exactly what they were doing, right? They couldn't contain what it was that they had seen and what they had heard. They were sharing it with whoever that they saw.
Well, and this is
confirmation, right? Yeah, that's one thing that we'll talk about with Simeon is the confirmation that this is the Christ, the Messiah. Very good. Sorry, before we move on, any other questions, comments, anything on the shepherds and their traveling to Bethlehem? And
I think that we should have the same attitude as verse 15. If we could have this attitude as you were talking about the gospel and good tidings. Let us now go to Bethlehem and see this thing that has come to pass, which the Lord has made known to us. Do we pray for and have that same attitude about the gospel and the desire to know who Christ is, and then to be able to pass and share that with others? Do we pray for those opportunities as we should? Do we have that type of haste that we should towards others that, hey, Christ has, as Jeremiah's been talking about, revealed something to us. Good news, glad tidings. Are we anxious, that anxious as they were, to go and to share it and to tell it and to live it?
And like Rick said, to get up and leave their job, what they were entrusted to of taking care and tending those sheep. This is more important. I'm going to do this. One thing that I was going to, so it says they left their fields and they went to Bethlehem. Or it says, sorry, in verse 11, born to you this day in the city of David a Savior. They obviously knew where that was, which was Bethlehem. Why is Bethlehem called the city of David? Anybody know? Any thoughts? It's really not a trick question, but I had never really thought about it that much, other than that's what it was called, right? But this, if you'll turn, you don't have to turn, but this is in 1 Samuel chapter 16. This is where Samuel is sent to anoint the new king after Saul. He was sent to Bethlehem, to the house of Jesse, and there you will find the one to be anointed. So it travels down to Bethlehem, and that's where David is anointed. So that's why it's the city of David. It's its hometown. The other thing that I always have to remind myself when we're talking about, especially the start of the Gospels, the start of Jesus' life, and we mentioned it, I guess it was one of the lessons last week, but up to this point, how long had there been silence? About how long between the last prophet, last message from God, till now? About 400 years. So there hasn't been anything going on. And then all of a sudden it's like stuff is starting to happen. Like we haven't seen anything like this in 400 years. And that's why it's so with the shepherds, like it's so amazing to them, and with Andrew, I think it was, where he says, this is who we've been looking for. This is who we've been waiting for these 400 years. Come and see. So I always have to remind myself, this is a big, major event, because there hasn't been anything going on for 400 years.
Just think about the knowledge that could have slipped away. It did kind of get changed a little bit in those 400 years. They were thinking of this militaristic type of leader that was coming, and they kind of weren't associating everything properly. And God used this kind of negative thing. Here, you're going to be forced to travel 100 miles while you're 9 months pregnant. That's not only dangerous for the baby or the mother, but there's so many different things. And sometimes negative things happen in our life, and we can't see right away that it's actually for our benefit. We're learning something during that time, either patience or love or something. God is teaching us something through that adversity, and sometimes we're just not mindful of that. Here, they may not have known the full reason of why they're having to go to Bethlehem or how it was all going to connect. They may not have remembered all of everything already. But then when these things happen, here come these shepherds, here comes this, here comes all these little things that help reinforce their idea that, yes, this is from God.
Good point. Again, providence. You just point to, you can't see it a lot of times. As it's happening, then when we look back and say, wow, yeah, God had a hand in that. Sometimes we can say that. So, moving on, we have now the circumcision and the presentation of Jesus. So, I think it's safe to assume that they stayed there in Bethlehem for the 8 days waiting for Jesus to be circumcised. After he's circumcised and he's given his name, they wait the amount of time that's allotted, which is 40 days, and then they travel from Bethlehem up to Jerusalem. That distance was significantly less, maybe 5 or 6 miles can cover in a day. That's everything that I thought of as you were talking, Rick. You know, if you think about, would it be better to travel from Nazareth down to Jerusalem, to Bethlehem, being those 9 months pregnant, and then traveling that short distance right after you have that newborn from Bethlehem up to Jerusalem, or traveling from Nazareth all the way down to Jerusalem with a brand new baby? So, I mean, I don't know if that had anything to do with it or not, as far as like the amount of distance traveled, maybe easier while she's pregnant as opposed to right after being born. It doesn't really matter. So 40 days, they travel up to Jerusalem to present Jesus in the temple. Why did they have to go to the temple? Why did they have to present Jesus at this time? It's kind of the history and the background. It's the old law. What about the old law? It was commanded to them. Why? What was the circumstance in which it was given to the Israelites? Anybody know? I hear murmurs. I hear murmuring.
So it was first given to Abraham, or Abram and then Abraham. But then they forgot to do it for a while. They were wandering around in the wilderness, and then right before they went into the nation to conquer it, they had to redo it because they didn't do it in the wilderness. So it was that recommitment to the covenant of Christ, God.
So if we turn over to Exodus chapter 13 and verse 2, right before, while they're still in the land of Egypt, before the last plague and the Passover of the angel of death, they're given what they are, how they're supposed to do the Passover. But that first male son is told to be redeemed. It says in our handout here that, I think is in the handout, that all the firstborn all the firstborn males are to be presented after 4 days, that all the males are holy to God, but the firstborn males have to be redeemed with the sacrifice. And the sacrifice was either 2 pigeons or 2 turtle doves, or if they were poor, could be 2 pigeons instead. But that was the purpose, is to fulfill the old law that they were given, but the firstborn male had to be redeemed. And it goes all the way back to the Passover, when they were saved, whenever they obeyed God and their firstborn son wasn't killed. The angel passed over them. And so it was to be a reminder that, God provided and kept, your firstborn alive and to follow the laws. But him going and presenting and fulfilling this sacrifice, yes, Jesus was born under the old law and had to keep it perfectly, right? And he had to fulfill everything in it in order to remove it and take away. That's what we read about in Hebrews chapter 4 and verse 15. Somebody want to turn over there and read that? Hebrews 4:15. Thank you. So he went through his entire life and didn't sin completely. That's one thing that Harry had said several times. It was neither a sin of commission. He never committed a sin, but it was never a sin of omission. He never didn't do anything that he was supposed to do. It was complete and perfect life, perfect living. Thank you. So, went to the temple, redeemed him with the sacrifice. Then you have this guy, Simeon, who Jeremiah, or he stole my thunder on talking about. But so he comes, and what's his story? what was he told by God? He would see the Messiah. At some point before he died, he would see the Messiah. And so he is just wandering around and stumbles upon him. No, the Spirit led him to the temple to see Jesus. And he sees him and he thanks God. He rejoices. Starting in verse 29, he lifts up his arms and he says this prayer, this blessing to God that you have fulfilled and you have done what you have said you're done, and now I can die. Now I can die happy, man. I don't. But like Jeremiah was saying, like, this is just a random guy, right? I mean, we have never heard of him before. We never hear of him again, as far as I know. But this random person that was told, you will see the Messiah, comes up and proclaims it. Everybody around is hearing him, and it's just further confirmation that this is legit. This is happening. This is Jesus, the Messiah. Any questions, comments?
It's interesting that God can use anybody, but so far what we've seen is him using very tender hearts who are anticipating these blessings. They love God and they want to see. I mean, Zacharias and Elizabeth, very faithful and righteous people. Mary and Joseph are described as the same. And this man and Anna, they're there, and even the shepherds, they're not like worried about this. They're super happy about it. And you contrast that with Herod. Obviously, it's a little bit different context. He wants to kill everyone because someone's going to challenge him. Then the Pharisees and all the Jewish rulers are not. I mean, they're not, rejoicing about this. They're not happy about this and all. And all of these others, though, are super excited about this and showing their tender hearts. And that's definitely, said that Mary pondered these things, kept them and pondered them in her heart in verse 19 when the shepherds told her this stuff. So it's even strengthening her faith as well as you've got this obvious divine revelation, and these people are super excited about it, and there's that play going on here too.
It's a good point. The rulers, they were not on board with this. Like, they saw this as a threat and not good news or good tidings. You mentioned that about Mary pondering this in her heart. That's one thing that kind of stuck out with Simeon is the end of what he's saying to them in verse 35. Yes, a sword will pierce through your own soul also. Mike Willis says that's a reference to Mary's sorrow at Jesus' death. That got me thinking, Mary, when we talked about as being, Jeremiah talked about Mary and her characteristics and her being righteous and being the one chosen to give birth to Jesus. But, you think about, she had a major responsibility, her and Joseph, of raising Jesus that you don't really think about. She had to have that righteous life in order to bring Jesus up and to endure these things that she's going to have to go through. Jesus is obviously different than the rest of her kids, than everybody else around. I mean, can't imagine having a kid that never messed up. I mean, it's something else that you have to be able to deal with, to handle, I guess, is the best way to say it. But very good. So we also have second person there in the temple, Anna. She's a prophetess. Husband died a long time ago, so she's been committed to the Lord this entire time. She sees Jesus as well and gives praise to him. And we're going to move on. Yes.
That's kind of what I had noticed. Some of it's kind of questions, and some of it is just interesting to me. In verse 33, where Joseph and his mother marvel at the things that are being said about Jesus. I think for us, we think, how are they marveling? God told them from the beginning who this Jesus was going to be, that they would give birth to. And so whether it's through prophecy, through the Holy Spirit, that these two individuals, and it points out the fact that they were waiting. They were looking for this Savior. And so for the parents to marvel and
I don't know.
Thinking upon these things, like what is this?
Well, it says that again in verse 51, that, after they had returned, after, that we're about to get into with Jesus being in Jerusalem after the Passover, this was them traveling back down to Jerusalem. But, towards the end of this account, again, Mary ponders all these things in her heart.
Also, and being marveled at listening to their son.
Well, and in his verse 50, kind of getting ahead of myself, but where Jesus answers to them, do you not understand? It must be about my Father's business. It says here that they didn't understand this statement, as she said. And so that's part of what I was saying as far as being the parents, this is just trying to figure this out. Yes, they were told, and this miracle's already happened as far as the virgin birth, but just like we see with the apostles, they were told and they preached, but they didn't necessarily understand everything that was going on. And so having to internalize it and figure it out. And the other thing that Mike Willis points out is that Luke is, he's pretty concise and to the point, right? And it's, says here that it's written from kind of Mary's view or Mary's standpoint. And so that may be kind of a pointing to that, Mary is kind of looking and trying to figure these things out, taking it into her heart.
I was going to say, she didn't really fully understand what his ministry was going to look like. She just knew that all these things were being prophesied about it, but what's that going to look like, right? I know what I need to do, but I don't know really how it's all put together when I first started a new project or something like that. So she's mulling this over her head. Because even when Jesus says, I'm to be about my Father's business, it wasn't his time yet to start that. So he's like, wait, no.
Yeah, so exactly. That's kind of the start of what are you talking about? What do you mean? But getting to this is the only event that we have recorded of Jesus' childhood. Basically we have his birth and being presented in the temple and Simeon and Anna, and then nothing until the age of 30 except for this account. When he's about the age of 12, they go down to Jerusalem for the Passover. They do that every year, probably a big group of them. Steve?
I know you're running out of time, and just so we remember, too, in the very last verse of the Gospel of John, it says, and there are also many other things that Jesus did, which if they were written one by one, I suppose that even the world itself could not contain the books that would be written.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of other things going on, but God chose what he wanted to reveal, and, this is important, obviously.
And we'll read about, or I don't know if we'll actually get to it or not, but whenever it says in verse 39 that when they had performed all these things according to the law of the Lord, they returned to Galilee, to their own city of Nazareth. Well, if you read back in Matthew, a lot of other things happened. Wise men came, King Herod trying to find and kill him, can't find him, so kills all the babies. They flee and go down to Egypt and told to stay there, and then eventually go back to Nazareth. So which one is right? Well, they're both right? I mean, Matthew just gives a lot more of kind of the detail in the background from the Jewish standpoint. Luke leaves it out. I mean, eventually, they get back to Nazareth, but exactly the end, there's a lot of stuff that's left out, but we're given what we need to know. We're given what the whole story put together gives us a complete picture.
I mean, the only reason I questioned it or wondered if someone knew of greater significance was because we do have such a limited account. The Holy Spirit mentions it twice.
Yeah.
Of Mary doing this, and so maybe that's just to impress upon us that she was no different than everyone else that they understand.
Sure.
Or there was something
Yeah.
more to it than anybody knows.
Ronnie, do you have something?
What came to me immediately with that is that he's 12 years old. This is his mother. He's God and he's a boy. Wrap your head around that.
Yeah.
She couldn't, I can't. I think that's the reason I would have pondered it.
Yeah. Exactly. Just in conclusion, travel back to Nazareth. Jesus subjected himself to his parents, and he increased in wisdom, stature, and favor with men. Jesus is our ultimate example in every way or shape. That's all I have. Thank you for your time and participation.